All right, after a couple day hiatus, finally time to get back to the 318. And basically what I've decided to do is we're just gonna get in there and check the valve lash. Now there's a couple things that I'm gonna have to take off the top of the engine. That will be most of this video. However, what I'm going to do while I'm doing that is I'm actually going to kind of walk through my reasoning behind what I'm doing. So, with that being said, we will get started. So, being an opposed twin, or being any engine really, if there is pressure in the cylinders, there are 3 locations that pressure can escape. The exhaust valve, the intake valve, and around the rings. If pressure goes around the rings, it will go into the crankcase. It will then exit the crankcase, either a breather, so this is the breather on this engine right here, or it will exit through a seal or any type of opening in the engine. If it's the exhaust valve that's leaking, it will exit out the muffler, and if it is the intake valve leaking, it will exit out the carburetor. So when we did we know the compression is a little low, and then we did the compression test, or the leak down test, sorry. So there was nothing in the compression test that made me worried per se. Because honestly, there wasn't much of a change from one in any of the things that we did. So dry, it was approximately 90 to 100 PSI. We squirted oil in there, 90 to 100 PSI. And then we ran it until it warmed up, and it was still 90 to 100 PSI. So there was no change in the compression itself, or relatively no change in the compression itself. So what that tells me is, okay, so the rings are still good. At least in my opinion, they're still good. This is where I start to lose all these stupid 3/8 bolts. So the rings are still good. Well, then leak down. All right, well, leak down was fine, but there's one fatal flaw in how I did the leak down test. Because I had to turn the cylinder, because it's opposed twin, that air could actually leak out, and I may not be at top dead center when it's leaking out. So if the valves were out of time, then the potential exists that it could still be a valve issue. Well, valve issue would represent the lower PSI readings. So normally this engine, and I've done, I don't know how many tests on this, compression tests on this engine. Normally this engine should read somewhere between, and I went back and looked at some other videos that I've done on this engine, particularly when I first rebuilt it and whatnot. This engine should theoretically normally be between 110 and 115. So basically what we've got is we've got somewhere we're not building the pressure that we would typically build when this engine is running. So what I need to do is figure that out why. Most likely it's a valve issue. If the valves are out of adjustment, it's not going to build the pressure that it should build. And if it doesn't build the pressure it should build, and you couple that with the sounds that we're hearing, makes me think that the valves are just out of adjustment. Now, why the valves are out of adjustment with this engine has less than, I went back and I tried to do some quick and dirty poking around, and I wasn't able to find much. But basically this engine should have about 40 hours on somewhere between 30 and 40 hours on the rebuild. So why is why do I need to go back in there when it has 30 or 40 hours on it and adjust the valve lash? I don't know. Another problem that it could be is the P-Series Onans are somewhat known. Oh crap, that should be a flat screwdriver right there. The P-Series Onans are known to throw valve seats. In fact, I have purchased a number of these engines with bad valve seats. Trash the block, save all the components. Oh, it was. I was trying to undo the wrong one. Basically what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to undo the choke cable. You always got to take that stupid little bracket off. And it seems like everybody likes the format of me talking, a little longer videos, see what I'm doing, which is good. I don't mind doing this video format. And I got to do the work anyway. I just have to think about things to talk about while I'm doing it. Because normally I work in silence or with like the radio on or something. All right. So now I should be able to take this off. Ew. So one of the reasons that I think a C-spec or later P-Series Onan is better than a B-spec or earlier is what I'm about to show you. So you see in there, look at all that nice goopy stuff. I want to know where that's coming from. I think it's coming from around the breather. That would be my guess, because it is all over down here. I mean, this, like I said, this engine has less than 40 hours on it, and that right there is not cool. So, because I'll have to get all that cleaned up before I take anything off, because I don't want this falling. I don't want any of that crap falling on the engine, because I'm trying to do this in frame. I have no desire to pull this engine. So I'll have to clean all that up before I can take the exhaust off. But, so my next step is I've got a couple different options. One of the kind of design flaws of this engine right here is this muffler. The muffler is attached to the front of the engine block through this plate right here. So there's a seam right through here. So this is the muffler, this is the engine block. This plate right here is attached to the engine block, but it is attached to the engine block behind the PTO. So I have a couple options. I can either try to loosen the muffler clamps and then leave the muffler exactly as it is, loosen the muffler clamps, take off the exhaust bolts, and see if I can get the exhaust pipes out, because you can't get the you shouldn't need to take the exhaust pipes out to do the valves. However, the problem you have is the fact that you can't get the intake and the carburetor off without doing all of that. So I think what I'm going to do, I'm looking at the time here. I actually think that probably what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and loosen everything up and get the throttle undone, and I think I will call it a night there. So basically I have to loosen up the throttle, and I've got to take the gas line off of the carburetor, and then the carburetor is completely free from the engine at that point. Just the 4 bolts are holding down the intake. Somebody suggested, I can't remember who it was, that the intake might be leaking, which is very possible. That hunting part there at the end of the last video, that hunting part is definitely could be a leaky intake. I'm not really sure what caused that. I don't think it's an intake because I've never had that problem before with this engine. So it's something that is a new symptom, and I don't think I'm going to worry about it at the moment. However, if you wanted to test for a leaky intake, you have to do a couple things. So with the engine running, what you can do, and there's a couple different ways you can do this. The way that I've always kind of thought about it, and the way I've tested for leaky intakes, is if you have just a blue propane torch, you can actually take, with all the shields off and everything like this, run the engine just at an idle, and if you just hold the propane torch down near the split halves of the intake, and if the engine smooths out, you know you're getting another combustible fuel source in there, and you're not just drawing in air, making it a lean condition. Because basically what happens is when you split that intake, there's too much air getting in the system and not enough gas. So what's going to happen is when you run that propane torch over it, just basically down each side, you obviously don't want to run it in the carburetor, but if you run it down here on each side of the intake and the engine smooths out a little bit, that gives you a good idea that your intake needs to be resealed, or you need to find another intake, so on and so forth. What I went ahead and did in the last video is I took the throttle arm off, disconnected the fuel line from the carburetor, and now what I'm going to do is, as we discussed, and I also cleaned up some of the trash over here that I showed you in the last video. We're going to see if we can take the exhaust pipes off by loosening the clamps. Wow, that's been surprisingly free. I figured I was going to break one of these. And we'll see if we can't get these exhaust pipes out. For some reason, I doubt that we will. But you know what? It never hurts to try. Saves us quite a bit of time. In the end, just to get in there and do it. I almost want to think that this engine is the engine that I helicoiled one of the exhaust holes on. Maybe? I don't think my plan's going to work. Nope. So I got to take the exhaust off. Oh well. So to take the exhaust off, like I said, it really stinks that those exhaust bolts are behind the PTO. I just don't see how this is going to work. It was a good thought. Maybe. I've got it like 90% there. Nope. All right, well, let me Let me go get all the tools, take the PTO off. That will require a 9/16 and a couple other things. So I'll make it do that.